What type of a quarterback will win your fantasy league? Well, of course you're looking for those dual threat guys that give you points through the air and on the ground. But what about those big play quarterbacks, guys that drive the ball down the field consistently? Are those big play attempts really going to win your fantasy league? The results might surprise you. To dive into the quarterback position just a little bit more, I decided to look at the top 10 quarterbacks in terms of deep attempts of 20 or more yards down the field. All the stats we're going to talk about in this video today are only stats when a quarterback attempts a pass more than 20 yards down the field. And I'm trying to find out the quarterbacks that go down the field the most. Are they truly the quarterbacks that give you the best shot to win your fantasy league? Kicking it off at number 10, Minnesota's Kirk Cousins. His 63 attempts of 20 or more yards down the field were 10th most in the league. And out of this group of quarterbacks that we're talking about right here, his 15.8 yards per attempt led the pack. Out of the 10 quarterbacks listed here, he was one of only 2 to have a negative touchdown to interception ratio. Kirk Cousins finished the year as the quarterback 7. So if you owned him in fantasy leagues, more than likely, he probably helped you to a fantasy championship. Who would have thought at the beginning of the year that Seattle's Geno Smith would wind up number 9 on this list? His 63 attempts tied him with Kirk Cousins. However, there was one big difference here between the two. Geno's 14 touchdowns to 2 interceptions were by far the best differential in this group. When you got big playmakers like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, it's hard not to be surprised how good he was down the field this year. Geno Smith ended as the quarterback 5 this season. If you had that on your bingo sheet this year, congratulations, you were the only one. The first 2 guys we talked about helped you win a league this year, but this guy absolutely didn't. Mac Jones's 67 attempts of 20 or more yards down the field were 8th most in the league this year. But just like Kirk Cousins, his touchdown to interception ratio was negative on these attempts. One of the biggest issues with Mac Jones was his play calling. They took a defensive coordinator that was fired as a head coach and let him try to call plays this year. There were so many inconsistencies that even when they were trying to drive the ball down the field, they probably were not really good attempts because teams were waiting on it. Mac Jones finished as the quarterback 23 this year, was benched at one point, and probably wasn't being used by anybody in your fantasy league. Justin Herbert finished the season as the quarterback 11. However, the last few weeks of the year really soured that. They weren't that good. But his 68 attempts were 7th most on this list. But his 785 yards on those attempts were the 3rd fewest among these quarterbacks. So yes, while the attempts were there, the yards were down. Why was that though? Part of it had to be the inconsistencies with the injuries this season. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were both hurt and missed time. One of their main deep threat guys, Jalen Guyton, he got hurt earlier in the year. And while Josh Palmer showed up and had some big plays, it didn't really happen that often. It'll be interesting to see what the Chargers do to give Justin Herbert better opportunities this year, because the opportunities were there clearly, but they weren't good consistently. While Tom Brady finished with the 6th most passing attempts of 20 or more yards down the field, out of these top 10 players here, he had only 4 touchdowns, tied for fewest of the group. One thing I can say though, that number would have been a lot bigger if it not had been for a couple of drop passes and a few penalties called that negated those big touchdowns. Just ask Mike Evans. He was on the receiving end of some of those. So while Tom Brady finishes the quarterback 12 and these numbers don't look that great, he likely would have finished a lot higher had it not been for those bad luck plays that just didn't come to fruition. So while Tom Brady finishes the quarterback 12, it could have been a lot higher and he would have been a lot better on this list. These numbers would have looked a lot better. But because of some of that bad luck and those plays not coming to fruition, the numbers just don't look that great. Trevor Lawrence really came on strong at the end of the season, and his 70 attempts of 20 or more yards, ranked 5th on this list, shows us that Doug Peterson trusted him to push the ball down the field this year. But even with those attempts, the big plays didn't come. His 690 passing yards on attempts 20 or more yards down the field were the fewest of the top 10 in this group. He still ended up finishing as the quarterback 8, but it will be interesting to see if going into the 2023 season, if the addition of Calvin Ridley in this offense doesn't help with some of those explosive plays. So hopefully they keep up the deep attempts, and then next season, they just see a little bit more production from him. Was Derek Carr the problem in Las Vegas? No. Was he at his best in Las Vegas? No. Was Josh McDaniels the main problem? Absolutely. And the numbers here show us that this offense was trying to run through Derek Carr this year. And Josh Jacobs playing so well probably allowed them the opportunity to push the ball down the field. But even though he threw 11 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions, his completion percentage was not the best. He only completed 33.8% of his passes of 20 or more yards down the field. Out of this group that we're talking about right now, that was the lowest. Now, you were missing 2 of your main receiving weapons for a large chunk of the year, Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. Both of those guys really help underneath, which could have potentially given him some better advantage over the top. But even with that being said, the completion numbers weren't quite there, but when they pushed the ball down the field, generally, they were pretty successful with it. But even with that being said, the quarterback 17 probably wasn't helping you win many championships unless you were in a 2-quarterback or super flex league. Now, 2 of the next 3 names are the reason why I put this video together, because I was shocked to see Russell Wilson at number 3 on this list. His 1,136 passing yards on attempts 20 or more yards down the field, second highest in the league. Yeah, you might have wanted to see a little bit more consistency and some more completions from him, but those numbers actually aren't that bad. Which is crazy because you had injuries to Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. It seemed like injuries, and even like Javonte Williams this season being injured still hurts the deep passing game. So now that Nathaniel Hackett is out of there and we've got Sean Payton in, will Russell Wilson be able to capture some of that late season magic that he had and extend it through all of 2023? Russ finished as the quarterback 16 overall. So even with his success down the field this year, it still wasn't enough to help you win fantasy leagues. There's no surprise that Josh Allen comes in at number 2 on this list. And it's also no surprise that he has the best numbers overall of this entire group. He completed 41% of his passes 20 or more yards down the field for 1,170 yards. He averaged 14 yards per attempt while throwing 11 touchdowns and having 5 interceptions. And yes, is the quarterback 2 overall in this video, we would assume that his ability to go down the field is helping you win championships. But don't forget, one of the reasons he finishes so high is his rushing ability and rushing touchdowns. So Josh Allen being at number 2 is great. It makes sense. He's good down the field. But for the purposes of this video, it's not helping us that he gets so many attempts on the ground. And now we head to the number 1 quarterback on this list. And of the top 4 quarterbacks on this list, 3 of them, including this guy right now, didn't help you win any fantasy championships. That comment probably shocked you because I'm assuming you thought that Patrick Mahomes might be here. Mahomes wasn't even in the top 10. That's right, the quarterback with the most passing attempts, 20 or more yards down the field this year, was Aaron Rodgers. He only completed 29 of his 84 attempts, 20 or more yards down the field. He only had 851 yards, and his 12 touchdowns to 6 interceptions were okay, but not great. But you want some numbers to really put this into perspective? Aaron Rodgers had 13 more attempts down the field than what Derek Carr did, and he only had 5 more completions than Carr. But he only had 9 more passing yards than Carr when going 20 or more yards down the field. And that's why this video is so interesting, because when you take a look at the data, the guys that go down the field the most are not helping you win fantasy leagues. Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers were all outside of the top 12 quarterbacks this season in fantasy points, but they were all in the top 4 of most attempts 20 or more yards down the field. So in 2023, when you're looking for your quarterback, we need to distinguish what is it that is really going to help us maximize their ability in fantasy points. Hit the like button, leave a comment down below if there was anything here that surprised you, and make sure you subscribe. And I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.